Hi, everybody. I'm M.K. Fain,
And I'm Sasha White.
and this is Identity Crisis, a show for gender critical teens and 20 somethings.
So, today we want to talk about friendship and specifically about the problem of either losing friends or having arguments or difficulties with your friends over your gender critical views. And we all know someone who's lost a friend for being a TERF if we haven't ourselves. So, the sort of focus of our conversation, we wanted to look at this over post that is about this particular situation from the perspective of one young woman. So she says, I'm openly gender critical because I just give no fucks anymore. Good for you. I'm Arab and I'm tired of not being able to embrace my womanhood and talk about my experience as an Arab woman because men are being allowed to identify into an oppressed class. I was well aware of the fact that I would receive social backlash due to my outspokenness, but I didn't care. I had been a secret radfem for almost a year till I decided to speak out. Maybe that was a stupid decision, but I'm in a unique position due to being Arab. I feel my pain has snuffed my fears. If I don't speak out, who will? How can I expect anything to change? And then she goes on to say that her friends are ghosting her or gaslighting her, making unfair comparisons, like telling her that she's just like Ben Shapiro. And she also talks about how when she tries to have these conversations with her friends, she says sometimes they pretend I never brought it up right then and there, or they respond with logical fallacies in order to evade critical thinking. Imagine how frustrating it is to be talking to someone and have something you just brought up be explicitly ignored. So I think this is a good thing for us to focus on. I feel that frustration, first of all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that she also points out in her post is the grief of losing a friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I think that our society just doesn't recognize enough is how hard it can be to lose a friend. When you lose a family member or a romantic partner, there's all sorts of cultural norms around how we deal with that and how we help people through that. But losing a friend, and this can happen for all sorts of reasons besides politics, is something that can really emotionally destroy you for a little while there. So this is something that I'm really glad we're talking about today because it is unfortunately very common among women who are outed or come out as gender critical.
Right. And it's a good point because we could say all day that when you lose these friends, that's a good thing because you don't want friends like this and you'll make better friends. And that's all true, but it doesn't mitigate that grief. And like she actually said, I know these people are massively flawed in their thinking and it's probably best to lose them, but the grief of losing relationships still stings. So, yeah, it's like rationally, you know that you're better off not being friends with someone who is not listening to you and not respecting your viewpoints, but it still hurts. It doesn't make it hurt any less.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I went through when I came out as gender critical. I lost three women who were very good friends of mine in a first round, and then later I lost other women who I was very close to who were very good friends. And it was really devastating. Like this poster says, it was depressing, and I ended up being depressed for a while after that. And I think that treating it like grief is actually really important because there isn't a magic bullet to say how do you deal with this besides that yes you will get friends and like yes you will move on in your life, but I think that you need to give yourself the time and space to acknowledge this loss and why it's so painful for you to really sit and recognize that these people meant something to me and it is really hard to be without them now, and then allow yourself to try to find new ways to move on with better friends. And it's a lot easier said than done because once you go through this, it can also make it hard to trust people going forward because you don't know if you can be friends with this person or will they cancel you.
Mhm. Yeah. I have a little that made me think of a little sort of a double anecdote about the trust thing. So one thing that is a really good virtue in a friend is that they're not afraid to say they disagree with you, and that increases trust. So the little story I had was I had one friend who I don't remember who mentioned it. I think I mentioned J.K. Rowling, and she said, "Oh yeah, she's been saying some turfy stuff." And then I said, "Well, I actually don't see it that way. I wanted to bring this up. I was really nervous. My heart was pounding because I knew she didn't agree with me." And she just looked at me askance, but she did not argue back. She just kind of um, what's the word, like maneuvered around it and just moved on to something else. Avoided it. And sort of, I feel like there's a sports ref, she pivoted to the side. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, she did a very skillful pivot and we didn't get to talk about it. Whereas another friend that I have, the first time I ever talked to her, this is like such a silly example, but it really shows a lot about her. We had a class together in college and she had this backpack that was covered with cats, like crazy cats flying through outer space. And she was wearing a t-shirt that had a cat on it and it said, I don't know what it said, like, are you kidding me or something? But so then after class, I said, hey, you must like cats or something. And she looks at me and she's like, no, actually, I'm more of a dog person. And we still laugh about that to this day because I went, oh, well, you know, I kind of thought that because of your backpack and your shirt. So then she looked and she laughed. She was like, oh, right. And she is more of a dog person. But anyway, the point being that she feels totally comfortable just going, no, that's not right. Or I don't agree with that. And we have a friendship where we can do that. We don't see eye to eye on everything. And but it's not really a problem for us.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I think that when you're younger, you tend to gravitate towards friends that are really similar to you. And this makes sense. It's a natural psychological bias. Is homophilia, I think, is the term, is the like of similarity towards yourself. And so when you're young, you know, in high school or college, at least for me, a lot of my friends were pretty similar to me. They were, you know, similarly situated economically. They were other young white women. We had really similar interests. We were all, you know, liberal, and we all were into psychology and social justice. And, you know, all of these things were what made us friends. We were friends because of our similarities. And now, after going through everything that I have, after being canceled and after losing the friends that I was actually on paper the most similar to, now what I look for in a friend is not similarity to me, but actually the ability to be different and be okay with that. And kind of crossing that bridge, I think it might be part of growing up, but I think it's also part of going through an experience where you realize that similarity on paper doesn't make a good friend. What makes a good friend is someone who can be different from you and still be your friend and still be there for you when times get hard and still have a drink with you and have fun or whatever you like to do. So I have noticed that as I'm out in the world thinking, could I be friends with this person? I almost even sometimes feel adverse now to someone who's too similar to me, because I've been through it where people who were just like me ended up turning into some of, you know, my worst enemies or the people who caused me the most pain in my life.
Mm, yeah. And that brings us to another thing that I think we wanted to talk about, which is sort of like the reciprocal nature of being accepting. So if you know that there's something a bit scary that you think that your friends might disagree with, and you have the expectation that they're going to accept that and give you the room to have that opinion and be different, you do have to extend that in return. You do have to allow for them to have their own opinions as well. I have another friend who, the first time we talked, actually, he corrected my pronouns for someone who goes by they, them. And I used the pronoun you would think of the person based on their sex. And now we laugh about that. But I think that if I had just immediately rejected him as the idea of a friend and he me, that doesn't work grammatically, and he had done the same thing towards me, then we wouldn't have been friends. But we're really good friends now, and we disagree with good humor and you know, mutual appreciation. So it's a two-way street. But the caveat there is you have to enforce your boundaries. You have to differentiate between that accepting them for their differences and whether they're not respecting you. If they're not respecting you, you have to withdraw that respect towards them, or at least not your human respect, but your willingness to try to listen to them.
You know, I think that part of the reason that women who come out or are outed as gender critical end up having a hard time making good friends in the future is because we end up actually trying to replicate this desire towards friends who agree with us within the movement. So you become gender critical, you join Over It, you join Spinster, you find your rad femme corner of Twitter, and then you want to find a bunch of women who agree with you. And I think that actually leads to a lot of the infighting and toxic culture that we've talked about on this show before, because you're doing the same thing that you just did. You were just with a group of friends who were like you and then couldn't handle disagreement, so you're not friends anymore. And then you went to a new group of people who are like you now, and you're trying to do the same thing again. And so like I've made amazing friends through being gender critical. A lot of them are quite different from me. You know, a lot of my friends in the movement now are actually quite a bit older than me, with you being an exception, Sasha. But, you know, Nina Paley is a woman who I really looked up to her before, but now it's really amazing. She's my friend and she's a generation older than me. Women in other countries, like Vishnavi, she's another woman who I've been able to connect with who's quite different from me in a lot of ways. But I think that if you go into being gender critical or into these communities just trying to find other people who are just like you, that can be really comforting at first, especially when you feel really alone and isolated. And there's nothing wrong with looking for people who are like you. But if you carry the expectation that because they're like you in one way, they must be like you in every way on every other issue, then you're going to be disappointed, because nobody is exactly like you on every single issue.
That's a great point, what you said about, you know, don't assume from those superficial things that you will not be simpatico or that you will be simpatico. The friend who corrected me on the pronouns, he wasn't a ideologue, he wasn't an extremist, he just thought that was the right thing and he was laid back about it. And he didn't mind. Once later we got to know each other and I explained why I think differently on that. He was open to that and he listened. So and he's not in the same surface level as me that you would necessarily know.
Yeah, I think something else that Sasha, you had brought up to me before the show started is the idea of not even wasting your time debating with unreasonable people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something we see as friendships are starting to break apart a lot. You already know that this person is going to be unreasonable about the issue, but we try so hard to convince them. We think if we just explain ourselves enough, we think if they just read the right research, if they just saw what I saw, if they watched the right YouTube video or listened to Identity Crisis on Apple Podcasts.
Well, that one would work.
Right. But we think that, if they just had the same information we had, they would change their mind. And in that case, what you're doing is you're actually kind of doing the same thing that they are, is assuming that you are 100% right and they are 100% wrong. And if only they knew better. And instead of wasting your time arguing with someone who is going to be unreasonable on an issue, it's a lot better to find someone who's open to the debate if you want to have it. But if this is a friend that you're going through the struggle with and you're at that verge where you're at an absolute impasse, like neither of you is going to budge at this point, then it's best to just move on from that. And that doesn't have to mean move on from the friendship, depending on whether or not that person is also able to move on with you. But it's not worth trying to change someone's mind to that degree. Mm-hmm. If someone is curious and asks you questions, then yeah, answer them. And actually I have an old friend from college who we've stayed friends for, 7 or 8 years now, a while. Yeah. And we never talked really about gender critical stuff. When I got canceled, I mentioned to her, I was fired from my job about this article, and I sent her the article and she's like, that's crazy, you got canceled for that. That was kind of the end of the conversation. But now she's actually been watching the show and asking me some questions about, trying to elaborate on my position on things. And this is the first time, despite the fact that I've been an advocate about this issue for years, and she's one of my best friends, that we've even talked about it, because your friendships don't have to be about all of these hyper emotional political issues. My friendship with her is about things that we relate to on other ways, and the way that we enjoy each other's company and disagreeing with each other on certain things. And honestly, some of the stuff that we've both been through that hurt us. And it's okay to have a friendship that isn't 100% about that. There's someone close to me in my life who is actually very religious and a youth pastor. And this is something that for a while I just could not understand because we were so similar in a lot of ways. We are both pretty smart, if I do say so. We both are, really independent people who have forged our own path despite, coming from families that were kind of messed up. And I just didn't get why, after everything that she had gone through, which was really similar to what I had gone through, how can you still believe in God and be religious and buy into all of that? Eventually, what I realized is even though we had actually ended up on different ideologies, we kind of approach our ideologies in actually a similar way. We both are into what we believe and we kind of preach it to people in a certain way, the way that, I go on YouTube or on 4W and share my opinion. But we both also see it as something that brings something good to the world. And that's why we want to do it. We want to help improve the world and improve people's lives. And neither of us would see it as something that's such a barrier that would prevent us from having a relationship with the other person. And in this, you can find, I know I just said you don't have to be similar to all your friends, but sometimes I think it's worth digging into the differences to see that maybe they can reveal other similarities that are actually more important than those surface level, do you believe in God or are you an atheist? Instead, what we found is that we both really care passionately about what we believe, so much so that we want to encourage others to see the same things that we see. But we also approach that with empathy towards people who disagree. And that, I think, is a much more important similarity than the surface level difference.
So we've written out these sort of a few tips for gender critical teens, sort of tips for survival. So number one is define the problem. Ask yourself, what do I think and feel? What do I observe? Do these things line up? That's the cognitive dissonance that we've talked about a bit before. And what is it that really matters to me here? So this is the first step that you just do internally. This is to prevent the groupthink. This is to prevent that not really knowing what you think, just sort of knowing what you should think. And this is mostly internal process, but then it's good to bring it outward and chat about it with other people.
Yeah, so then the next one that you have here is don't feel inferior or superior from being alone in your opinions or going against the grain. This will cut off connections, which we need in order to discuss this stuff with reasonable people. And I think this is so important because we do. If you are going against the grain, we talked about conformity in our last episode. So if you haven't really analyzed your nonconformity, you might feel scared and inferior because of it. If you've overanalyzed it like I have, then maybe you actually feel superior and then you think you're better than the other people who are just mindlessly going along. We see this actually, I think, with a lot of ideas that are against the mainstream, some fringe movements where there's this really condescending idea that we look down on people who don't get it. A vegan community, really big. You think that you're superior because you are going against everything that you've been told. And that can actually put off the people that you're trying to connect with. And so instead of having a complex about it, just accept that some people agree with some things, some people disagree with others. And the more you're able to connect with the person on an individual level, the more likely you are to be able to actually help open their eyes.
Number 3 is do not discuss/debate this stuff with unreasonable people. Your energy is a precious resource. So we did touch on this. We did talk about this. If someone is insulting you, belittling you, ignoring what you're saying, repeatedly throwing straw man arguments or other fallacious forms of arguments at you, if they are just being threatening or harassing of you, if they're just being an asshole, you don't need to engage with them. You don't need to convince them.
And then the last tip we have for you today is know that you're not alone and it gets better. So, I mean, all of us have struggled in different ways, especially as young adults in our relationships with finding out where we fit in the world. And if you're coming out as gender critical in today's day and age, I think that's just sort of one flavor of the same thing that a lot of people throughout history and a lot of women especially have gone through, which is trying to find your voice, trying to find where you fit in, trying to find your tribe, your people who you can trust and rely on. And the truth is, as much as this one is also a cliche, it does get better. And, you know, it can be hard to see that when there's all sorts of, you know, just awful things happening around us, especially on this topic that we care about. You know, everything that's happening with the new administration right now can make it really hard to feel like it's getting better. But this isn't about what the state of legislation is going to be today versus a year from now. It's about how you are going to be and how you're going to live your life despite what's going on in the world around you. A healthy and happy person isn't a person who necessarily lives in a healthy and happy world. It's a person who, despite everything that's happening around them, is able to maintain their sense of balance and their sense of peace. And in time, if you practice learning yourself, if you practice the skills that actually make you resilient to change and resilient to disruption in your life, then it does get better. So you can hold on to that because it really does.
So we want to know what you guys think. How do you deal with these minefields? How do you deal with these conversations and with your friendships and everything that comes along with it? You can leave us a comment or shoot us an email as always. So we do read those emails and we love hearing from you guys.
We have new episodes up every Monday right here on the Plebity channel on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.